Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's EBC. We're down at St. John's this week thinking about what happens right after Easter morning, right? And we're here because I want to show you a couple of crosses that we can see and then compare that to what was happening immediately after Jesus' resurrection. So first of all, of course, you know that we've got a cross on the top of St. John's, and it stands up tall for everyone to see. And in fact, in this area, if you come around over here, if you look way off in the distance here, there's actually a cross for the Catholic Church over there, and it stands on a really tall hill, and it's a gorgeous, beautiful building for our friends over there. And that declares God's love as far as anyone can see that cross. And then, if you come over here even a little bit, you've got another cross out at our campfire area that the youth use when they're thinking about Jesus. Now, let's come back over here for a moment, because these crosses all stand and declare the symbol of Jesus' death and resurrection. But on that first Easter Sunday evening, none of that was happening. If you know anything about St. John's, you know that in that sort of blank space just aside of those windows, there is a room called the sacristy. And you go back in there, and it's windowless, and you could hide in there, and there's some little stairs that go up to a storage area, which is even more secluded. And that's the picture I get from the story that we have in John 20, verses 19 to 31. Because when we first get to this story, by the way, it's about doubting Thomas. But really, the story starts with the disciples. And we've moved from Luke last week to John this week, but the setting is about the same. We know that at least a few people, whether it's the women, or whether it's Peter, or maybe both, or maybe there's some men on the road from Emmaus, and somehow each of those has seen Jesus and failed to recognize him originally, and then come around to seeing who he is. But we know, if we pick up from the story last week, that as the women had told the disciples about Jesus' resurrection, they thought it was an idle tale, and the only one that did anything was Peter. And now we see that the disciples are hiding in a locked room. Like a tiny little room, windowless, up in a church, doing essentially nothing. Hiding, concerned. They have heard firsthand the story of Jesus' resurrection. And they are hiding in a locked room. Last week, I asked, what will our response to Easter be? And I think we can take some comfort in the fact that even the disciples, the people closest to Jesus, in that moment, didn't immediately jump out to do all of the evangelizing and preaching and teaching and loving that Jesus had commanded. They were hiding in a locked room. But then what happens? Jesus comes to them and invites them to see the holes in his hands, to put the hand in his side, and they believe it's him, and they see it's him. And then Jesus does things that are really important. He says, "Peace be with you." He calms their hearts. And he says it again, "Peace be with you." And then as he charges them to go out in the world, he breathes the Holy Spirit on them. Now there's another whole piece of this story in which Thomas isn't there, and Thomas complains and says, "Unless I get to see, I'm not going to believe." We've done that story before. In fact, we were in Seattle last year about this time thinking about that story, and I said at the time, and if you wanted to go back and find it, that Thomas gets sort of a bad rap for being the only one who's sort of asked to believe Jesus without seeing Jesus. But we, in fact, all of these crosses that exist, the ones that you see here with me, the ones that you see where you are right now, all of those crosses were built by people who have believed without seeing. That is the lesson that exists here, that people who just see are still just hiding in a locked room. People who have been given the peace of Jesus, who have been given the Holy Spirit, can believe without the seeing, can do without having been specifically instructed. And we have the gift to be those people, to respond to Jesus' love and the Easter story by getting out of the locked room and out into the world, spreading Jesus' love. Everyone, have a great week.